Will you trade your meal for my doll? My brother, he hasn't eaten in days. Please, he's so hungry. Imagine hearing that. Not in a movie, not in some old world story, but right now. You're on a cold, metallic space station, a million miles from Earth, and a tiny, shivering alien child is holding up her only toy and offering it for your dinner. What do? This is the story of that choice. It's a story about a man who was forced to decide between the rules of the station and the rules of his own heart. And the choice he made, well, it changed everything. Before we dive into this, I just want to say thank you for being here. This community is amazing, and I'm so glad we get to share these stories. If you love tales that explore the very best and sometimes the most challenging parts of the human spirit, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. After that, please subscribe and ring that notification bell. It's a tiny click for you, but it tells the platform that we're doing something good here, and it helps these stories reach a much larger audience. Also, I love to see where everyone is listening from. Drop a comment below and let me know what part of the world you're tuning in from. And if you have suggestions for a story, I'm always reading the comments. Okay, got your drink? Got a comfy chair? Good. Let's begin. The place was called Concord Station. A name that promised harmony, but delivered nothing but cold, hard commerce. It was a hub, a crossroads of spinning metal rings and flickering neon, parked in the empty black between two trade routes. And like any hub, it had its dark corners. Marshal Emerson knew those corners better than anyone. He was a human, which on Concord meant he was a curiosity. Humans were rare out here. They were seen as unpredictable. Too soft by some, too violent by others. Emerson was just a man trying to do his job, and today that job was walking the beat on the lower ring. The lower ring wasn't just a place, it was a state of being. The air smelled of ozone, recycled water, and something metallic that always lingered at the back of your throat. Here the station's upworld corporations dumped their refuse, and a whole forgotten population, the Kirell, survived on it. The Kirell were small, slender beings with wide, dark eyes, looking like something between a forgotten elf and a startled deer. They were refugees from a resource war nobody remembered, and on Concord they were invisible. They were scrappers, the bottom of the station's caste system, and the station's automated security patrols were programmed to ignore them. Emerson was not automated. He'd been on patrol for 10 hours. His feet ached inside his heavy-duty station boots. He found a relatively clean spot on a bulkhead, away from the drip of a leaking coolant pipe, and finally unsealed his dinner. A Nutri-Pack. He pressed the activation stud, and the gray pouch hissed, inflating with steam. The smell of actual, synthesized hot food, a savory, broth-like aroma, cut through the metallic tang of the corridor. It was the best part of his day. He was just lifting the first spoonful when he felt it. The one thing every cop, every soldier, every human learns to feel. He was being watched. He didn't move, just let his eyes scan the shadows. There, huddled behind a pillar of exposed conduits, was a child. A Kirell. She was impossibly small, wrapped in what looked like a piece of discarded thermal blanket. She wasn't moving, just watching. Staring at the steam rising from his food. Emerson sighed. Station kids, no matter the species, were often professional thieves. They'd work in teams. One to distract, one to lift your datapad. Go on, kid, he said not unkindly. Beat it. I'm not in the mood. The child didn't move. He took another bite. The kid took a half step out of the shadow. This was new. She was shaking, but it wasn't just the station's cold. It was fear. I have trade, she whispered. Her voice was like wind in a broken pipe. She spoke standard, the trade language, but it was rough, learned from hearing it, not from a school. Emerson lowered his spoon. Trade? I'm not a merchant, kid. I'm the law. Now go on, find your parents. No parents, she said flatly. She took another step, fully into the dim light. And that's when he saw what she was holding. It was clutched to her chest, a small bundle of rags? No, it was a doll. A scraps doll, stitched together from different colored bits of fabric, with button eyes and yarn for hair. It was old, worn, and clearly deeply loved. She held this doll out to him. Her tiny, three-fingered hand was trembling so hard the doll danced in the air. Trade, she said again, her voice cracking. Emerson frowned, setting his meal pack down. Trade for what? I don't have any credits on me if that's what you're... No, she said, shaking her head. She pointed a trembling finger. Not at his utility belt, not at his sidearm, but at the steaming food pack in his other hand. For your meal, she whispered. Emerson's mind just stopped. He stared at the doll, then at the food, then back at the child. The sheer absurdity of it. This was a new kind of scam. You want to trade this toy for my dinner? The child's big, dark eyes suddenly filled with tears, and it was the tears that broke him from his cynicism. They weren't fake. This wasn't a performance. This was desperation. It is a good doll, she pleaded, her voice rising into a desperate squeak. My mother made it. It is very strong. See? She held it up, showing him the careful, tiny stitches. My brother, she choked out, the words tumbling over each other. He is sick. In the conduit. He hasn't eaten in days. Please. He's so hungry. And there it was. The cold transaction. Emerson looked at the scraps doll, a priceless symbol of a childhood that was being burned for fuel. He looked at his hot 10-credit meal pack. And he looked at the little girl, who was offering the only thing she had in the universe to save her brother. The corridor, the station, the whole universe seemed to stop, holding its breath, waiting for his answer. Marshal Emerson was a product of the human interstellar service. He was trained to be rational. He was trained for violence, for negotiation, and for the cold, hard math of orbital mechanics and sector law. His entire life was built on logic. And what was happening in front of him was the death of logic. His brain tried to categorize the event. Extortion by pity. Blackmail, sentimental, vagrancy. But his heart, that stupid, heavy human brand pump, was shouting a different word. Abomination. He looked at her tiny, outstretched hand. The doll with its mismatched button eyes seemed to stare at him, judging him. He realized his own hand was shaking. He wasn't cold. He was furious. This wasn't anger at the child. It was a deeper, colder rage. It was a rage at the system that had created this moment. A rage at a trillion-credit station that let children starve in its service tunnels. A rage at a universe so cold and transactional that a child believed her only path to survival was to trade the last piece of her own soul. To a human, some things are not for sale. Innocence is one of them. No, he said. The girl's face, which had been a mask of desperate hope, just crumpled. She let out a tiny, wounded sound and started to pull the doll back as if she had offended him. No, Emerson said again, his voice thicker this time. He quickly held up a hand. Wait. No trade. He picked up the hot meal pack. The child flinched, expecting him to pull it away to guard it. Instead, he pushed it toward her. The food is a gift, he said, forcing his voice to be gentle. No trade. You keep the doll. She just stared at him. Her mind, just like his, couldn't process the event. This was not in her rule book. In the lower ring, nothing was free. Everything had a price. A gift was just a debt you didn't understand yet. She shook her head, terrified. She thought it was a trick, that he was mocking her. Please, she begged, tears now rolling freely down her dust-smeared cheeks. Is good trade. Good doll. Please, my brother. She pushed the doll at him again, more forcefully. Take it. Take it. Kid. Lyra, what's your name? Emerson asked, trying to break the cycle. Lyra, she whispered. Okay, Lyra. Listen to me. He crouched down, wincing as his knee-joint armor hissed. He was a big man, a death worlder, as the station slang went. He knew he was intimidating. He made himself small. He looked her right in the eyes. The doll is beautiful, he said. And he meant it. It's worth more than this food. It's worth more than all the food on this station. Your mother made it. You keep it. He gently, slowly took her hand, the one holding the doll, and closed her own fingers around it. You keep her safe, he said. Then he took her other empty hand and placed the warm meal pack into it. And you take this. It's not a trade. It's just food. Okay. We, humans? We don't take dolls from kids. Lyra stared at the warm pack in her hand. Her fingers automatically gripped it. She looked up at him, her dark eyes so wide he felt like he could fall into them. She didn't understand the why, but she understood the what. She had the food. Now, Emerson said, his voice shifting, becoming the marshal again. You said your brother was sick. You're going to take me to him. Right now. He stood up, his voice suddenly commanding. Lyra looked at the food, then at the doll still clutched in her other hand, then at the giant human looming over her. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him with fear of a threat. She was looking at him with the dawning, terrifying realization of hope. She nodded once, clutching the meal pack, and darted into an alleyway so dark it looked like a crack in the world. Emerson tapped his comms. Dispatch, this is Marshal Emerson. I'm going off tracker. Lower ring, Sector 7. Mark my position. I'll be in touch. He heard the static of an acknowledgement as he followed the tiny shadow into the darkness. He had just broken the first and most important rule of the lower ring. He had gotten involved. The alley was a maze. It wasn't a street, but a network of maintenance tunnels and ventilation shafts that hadn't seen a cleaning drone in a decade. The air was thick and wet. Lyra moved through it like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the metal grating. Emerson had to duck under massive pipes, his armor scraping against the walls. She finally stopped at a junction, a small, circular room where 4 massive conduits met. In the corner, on a pile of what looked like discarded insulation, was another, smaller bundle. It was her brother. Emerson didn't need a medical scanner to see the kid was in bad shape. He was shivering violently, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. Lyra rushed to him, tearing open the meal pack. Orin. Food. The human, he gave it. She tried to press the food to her brother's lips, but he wouldn't respond. He just coughed, a dry, rattling sound. Emerson was at their side in an instant. He put his gloved hand on the boy's forehead. It was burning. He's not just hungry, Lyra, Emerson said, his voice grim. He's sick. He's burning up. This food won't help him right now. Lyra's face, which had been bright with a moment of triumph, collapsed back into that familiar, awful mask of despair. No, he just needs to eat. He needs a doctor, Emerson said. He stood up and hit his comms unit, this time flipping it to the emergency channel. Concord Dispatch, this is Marshal Emerson, badge 477. I have a medical emergency. Lower ring, conduit 7 Delta. I have 2 Kirell minors. 1 male, unresponsive, high fever, severe malnutrition. I need a medical team here. Now. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, bored and bureaucratic. Acknowledged, Marshal. A medical alert for Kirell? Sir, all undocumented Kirell pickups are handled by sanitation and displacement. I can send a sanitation drone to your... The click of Emerson's thumb releasing the safety on his sidearm was loud in the small room. Lyra flinched. Emerson's voice dropped 10 degrees. It was a voice that had ended riots. Dispatch, he said, his words clipped and precise. You will dispatch a medical team. With a full life support gurney. And blankets. Hot ones. You will not send a sanitation drone. I am declaring these 2 children under a marshal's protection order, effective immediately. They are my responsibility. If I don't see a human-certified medic here in 5 minutes, I am leaving my post and carrying this child to the high-ring med bay myself. And I will file a formal complaint against you by name for dereliction of duty and accessory to, well, let's not find out. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end. The dispatcher was probably checking the regulations. He would find nothing. A marshal's protection order was a real thing, but it was meant for witnesses in high-profile criminal cases. It had never been used for a pair of Kirell scrappers. Sir. The dispatcher stammered. That is highly irregular. It is, Emerson agreed. And the clock is ticking. 5 minutes. He cut the connection. He looked down at the 2 children. Lyra was staring at him, her mouth open in awe. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the power. Emerson holstered his weapon and began unfastening the heavy, insulated outer jacket of his uniform. It was rated for hard vacuum. He wrapped the small, shivering boy in it. Orin immediately vanished inside its folds. Emerson then sat down on the cold grate, his back against the curved metal wall. He patted the floor next to him. Come here, Lyra, he said, his voice gentle again. We wait. She hesitated, then slowly she crept over and sat beside him, tucking herself against his armored side. She was still clutching her doll. He was a mountain of warmth and armor. He had declared them his. In the deep, dark cold of the station's guts, a human had just done the most human thing possible. He had seen 2 lost, freezing creatures and he had decided they were a pack. His pack. And Marshal Emerson protected his pack. The med team arrived in 3 minutes. They were professionals, 2 aliens and a human medic, and they worked fast. They got Orin onto the gurney, hooked him up to a monitor and started in 4. As they began to lift the gurney, Lyra panicked. No. Where are you taking him? Don't take him. She grabbed onto Emerson's arm, her small fingers digging in. It's okay, Lyra, Emerson said, putting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. They're taking him to a hospital. To make him better. And we are going right with him. I'm not leaving you. He looked at the human medic. She stays with him. And I stay with her. Understood. The medic, a young woman with tired eyes, just nodded. Understood, Marshal. Let's move. They raced through the station, this strange little procession. 2 medics, an unconscious Kirell child on a floating gurney, a giant human marshal and a tiny, terrified Kirell girl clinging to his hand. Aliens in the corridors stopped and stared. A marshal escorting scrappers? The world had turned upside down. They arrived at the lower ring clinic. It was sterile, white, and cold. Orin was wheeled into an emergency room, and a nurse tried to lead Lyra to a waiting area. She wouldn't let go of Emerson. I'll wait with her, Emerson told the nurse. Just get her some food. Real food. And maybe hot chocolate? Do you have that? The nurse looked confused, but a nod from the marshal was in order. They sat for an hour. Lyra, now holding a steaming mug of hot chocolate in both hands, had fallen into an exhausted sleep, leaning against his leg. Emerson just sat, watching the door, feeling the adrenaline fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The door finally hissed open, but it wasn't the doctor. It was Administrator Varys. Varys was a Xylothian, a tall, insect-like being who was all sharp angles and rigid posture. He was the station's chief accountant. He looked at Emerson, at the sleeping Kirell child, and his antennae twitched in annoyance. "Marshal," Varys said, his voice a dry click. "I was alerted to a significant irregularity in your duty log. You have requisitioned a full med team and filed a Class A protection order for these." He gestured at Lyra. "Their children, Varys," Emerson said, not bothering to stand. "One was dying. They are undocumented biologicals," Varys clicked. "They have no resource draw authorization. They are a net loss. They belong in the displacement pens on Ring 9, as per station protocol." "The boy was trying to trade her sister's toy for a meal pack," Emerson said, his voice quiet, but carrying a dangerous weight. "Protocol didn't seem to cover that." "The protocols are clear, Marshal. The station is not a charity. Your sentiment is noted, but it is inefficient. I am here to transfer them to displacement. The clinic has stabilized the male. They will be fine." "No," Emerson said. Varys's head tilted. "No? Marshal, that is not your decision. You are a peacekeeper, not a father." Emerson finally stood up. He was a full head taller than the Xylothian. He unclipped his datapad from his belt and held it up. "You're an accountant, Varys. So let's do some accounting." His fingers flew across the screen. "I am filing for formal long-term custodianship of both minors. Citing Concord Station Humanitarian Discretion Act, Section 7, Subsection B. Upholding Galactic Standard of Sentient Rights. Interspecies Welfare Act, Article 4, Marshal's Prerogative in the Protection of Minors. I am naming them Lyra Emerson and Orin Emerson. They're my family now. They are documented. And as my legal dependents, they are now authorized for Class B habitation, a full education stipend, and retroactive medical billing." He pressed submit. The datapad chimed. Varys was, for the first time, speechless. His antennae were vibrating. You can't. That's not what those acts are for. This is a perversion of the legal code." "It's paperwork," Emerson said, giving him a cold smile. "It's legal. It's filed. You're an accountant, Varys. You know the rules. You can't argue with the system." He stepped in front of Varys, blocking the administrator's path to the sleeping child. "This is not sentiment. This is protocol. My protocol. You will find them a warm room in the refugee habitation block. You will process their new citizenship. And you will bill all of it to the Marshal's discretionary fund." Varys looked at the human. At the sheer, irrational, illogical determination in his eyes. This human was willing to wreck his career, to spend a fortune in department funds, all for 2 scrappers. It made no sense. And that's what scared him. He couldn't calculate this. He couldn't find the angle. "This is highly unorthodox, Marshal Emerson," Varys finally clicked, taking a step back. "It is," Emerson said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Administrator, I'm waiting for the doctor." Varys looked at the human, at the child, and then at the submitted file on the datapad. He turned, his sharp limbs clicking angrily, and marched out of the room. Emerson let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He had just weaponized human empathy. He had taken the station's own cold, bureaucratic system, and he had won. 6 weeks later. The air in the habitation block on Ring 3 was warm, clean, and smelled faintly of cinnamon. It was a sector for families, for station workers and their dependents. It was a world away from the lower ring. Marshal Emerson, off-duty and in a simple civilian shirt, stood in front of apartment 3 Delta 9. He knocked. He heard the scramble of small feet, and the door slid open. "Waldo." Lyra was beaming. She was clean, her hair like fibers brushed, and she was wearing a bright yellow tunic. She had gained weight, her face was fuller, her eyes bright and clear, no longer haunted by shadows. She threw her arms around his legs in a hug. You came. You came. Orin, he's here. Emerson laughed, patting her on the head. Told you I'd be here, didn't I? How's the school, Pat? It's hard, she said, grabbing his hand and pulling him inside. The math is stupid. But I can read all the words now. Watch. The apartment was small, but it was theirs. It was warm. Through the window you could see the stars. Orin was sitting on a soft couch, a data pad in his lap. He looked up and smiled. The fever was long gone. He was still thin, but he was healthy. He looked like a kid. Hey, Marshal, Orin said. He was shyer than his sister, but his voice was strong. Hey, Orin. How's the leg? The doctor says I can walk on it next week, he said proudly. That's great news. Emerson looked around. They were safe. They were warm. They were in school. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. He had not just fed them for a day. He had changed their lives. I brought you something, Emerson said, holding up a small brown paper bag. Lyra's eyes went wide. More hot chocolate? Nope. Better. He handed the bag to her. She tore it open, her small hands fumbling with excitement. She reached inside and her breath caught. She pulled out a teddy bear. It was brand new, soft, with fuzzy brown fur, a stitched nose and bright, shiny black eyes. A classic, Earth-style teddy bear he'd had to special order from the high-ring import shop. Lyra just stared at it. She held it up, her expression unreadable. Emerson felt a sudden jolt of panic. Did he get it wrong? Did she not like it? I just thought. He began to stammer. You know, to go with your other one. Lyra didn't say anything. She carefully set the new teddy bear on the table. Then she ran to her small bedroom. Emerson and Orin exchanged a confused look. She came running back out. Clutched in her hand, as always, was the old, worn, faded scraps doll. She stood in the middle of the room looking at the new, fluffy bear and then at the old, precious doll. Then she looked up at Emerson, and her face broke into the biggest smile he had ever seen. She carefully sat the new teddy bear next to her scraps doll on the couch. Then she ran to Emerson and hugged him tighter than she ever had before. Now I have two, she whispered into his shirt. Emerson felt his throat tighten. He hugged her back, his big arms wrapping around her completely. He looked over her head at Orin, who was watching them with a quiet, knowing smile. Yeah, kid, Emerson whispered, his voice rough. Now you have two. The human superpower wasn't his armor. It wasn't his weapon or his rank or even the law. It was this. The understanding that you don't replace what's precious. You add to it. You don't just stop the starving. You build a home. You protect your pack. And that's where we'll leave Marshal Emerson, Lyra, and Orin. A small act of compassion, a refusal to accept a cold and cruel trade, and a whole new future was born. What did you think of that? What was your favorite part of Emerson's journey? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I really do read as many as I can, and I love getting your suggestions for future stories. If you enjoyed this and you want to support the channel, the single best thing you can do is hit that like button, share this story with a friend who might need it, and of course subscribe if you're new here. Don't forget to check out the channel playlist for more stories just like this one. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. It means the world. Be good to each other out there, take care of your pack, and I'll see you in the next one.